Hello, Atmore. It's the Lloyd and Friends Show. And now here's your host, Lloyd Albritton.
All right, Lloyd Albritton here with a real delight. David Gehman is my guest today. And I'm so happy to get a chance because David talks all the time. You know, he's on the radio station. He can fill in space good. But today we're putting him on the spot. We're going to talk about David. Okay, so he's already sweating bullets here. We've talked to David's father, Marty. A great interview. I hope most of you listened to that. And we've talked to Jerry, older brother. Okay.
Much older.
Much older. You're right. Now, I know you had one brother, Dale, that passed. That was Dale, right?
That's correct.
Any other brothers?
Yeah. Joe, he's my younger brother. There was actually
Joe was younger than you.
Two families in our family. Dale, Jerry, and I were all within a couple of years of each other. Then there was an 8-year gap, and then Joe, and then 2 years later, Martha. So
you had
4 boys and 1 sister.
Four boys,
she's the baby of the family. She's still the baby.
Your dynamic is very similar to mine. We had 5 boys and 1 girl, the baby girl.
I have loved getting familiar with your family with your interviews.
And
I'm very impressed.
I've always joked my mother could never have anything nice because we boys horseplay and would tear everything up. You know,
I love it.
Breaking
That's
lamps.
awesome.
It was just terrible that Mama never had anything nice. Well, when we get together, it's a lot of fun, which since I've known you and observed your family dynamic, I see a lot of similarities. So I know you guys enjoy one another.
Well, we're related.
We are.
By marriage.
We are. That's right.
Uncle Lindsay.
Uncle Lindsay was
and
married to my daddy's sister, Aunt Jean.
Aunt Jean.
Yeah. And Uncle Lindsay was your...
Uncle Lindsay would be actually Mother's uncle.
Your mother.
So he would have been the youngest of my grandmother's family.
Okay.
In fact, there's a picture of him on the wall out here.
He was just a
diligent man, just a hard worker, and just impressive what he did as a Creek Indian back in the days that he had to work to get to school. But he did that, and wow, what a history.
Yeah, always loved him. Now, David, your dad in his interview talked about where he came from, about Pennsylvania.
That's correct.
Came out on a Mennonite mission down here and met your mother and fell in love and ended up staying. And I know from Jerry loved trains, and we talked about trains with him, and you're the airplane guy, so hopefully we're going to have some time to talk about how this came about, your love for airplanes. Let's start with a little bio. Tell me a little bit about the family dynamic coming up. Okay. You and I just talked about, boys in the family and how difficult that must have been.
You know how boys are.
I thought my father was hard with that belt, but when I look back, I wonder how in the world he did it.
Right.
I had 1 son, and if I'd had to raise 5, I think I'd have killed them all. In fact, there was an older guy who told me one time I was complaining about the difficulties I was having with my son. He said, just be patient. He said, in time he'll turn out all right. He said, I had a son too, and I thought about shooting him like 4 or 5 times. But I let him live, and he turned out pretty good. And that's what happened with my son as well. He came out pretty good. I'm glad I let him live.
Yeah, I am too.
Well, now, you were born right here in Atmore, I assume?
Yes, right.
And you grew up?
Green Lawn Hospital, as a matter of fact.
At Green Lawn?
Green Lawn Hospital.
They used to have the vaults of maternity.
Right.
That's where I was born, and my wife as well.
Green Lawn. It was at the old hospital. It was back in 1960. December 23rd, 1960. There you go.
That's your birthday? December 23rd?
December 23rd.
Well, tell me a little bit about your experience as a kid. Now, I know we've talked a little bit, and you had some significant health issues when you were young. You look like the picture of health now. But, tell me a little bit about your younger years growing up. Now, your dad's such a sweet, nice guy. I can't imagine he was the disciplinarian.
Well,
who did the whipping?
There's the side of dad that you see on the outside, but then there was the side of dad that we, the children, saw. Really, what you saw on the outside of Dad is what we saw as well. Dad was, yes, he was a disciplinarian, just because he was the preacher didn't mean that he wouldn't stop preaching and get up and take us out and take care of business.
Right in the middle of the sermon.
Right in the
probably.
middle of the sermon.
Okay.
That could happen at any time. He helped us to know the difference between right and wrong. I think with the correction, there was love there. I think he had to laugh at times at the shenanigans that Jerry and I, mainly Jerry, Dale not so much. Dale was kind of the pristine one. He was righteous. And
Who was Mama's favorite?
I think we all were, to be honest.
Okay.
I think they didn't really play favorites with any of us, but Dad was had to laugh at times because when we knew that we were going to get a whipping, and Dad had one of them little thin belts,
Mm-hmm.
and we preferred whippings from Dad as to whippings from Mom because Mom didn't have a belt. She would make you go out and get a switch off of the bush.
Uh-huh.
And them switches
That's what
would
my
dance
mama
up and down your legs, and oh boy, you would dance. The idea was to get a towel and stuff it in your pants before you had the whipping, and that way it softened the blows.
We tried that at school a few times when we get those paddlings. Put a book in your pants.
So we did have that happen, but Mom and Dad, I think, given the circumstances, times were tough. We were not wealthy by any stretch of imagination. Dad had the responsibility of Gospel Light Church for years and years and years, and church was a way of life for us. I mean, a lot of folks go to church on Sunday, and if they make it there, that's pretty good. Well, it was Sunday morning, it was Sunday night, it was Wednesday night, it was any time there was an activity at church, we were there. They raised us in church, and we were raised without TV. We had radio. Dale deviated because he got into radio, TV, electronics, and he took an old TV chassis, tune in the TV station so we could listen. Mm-hmm. So we listened to TV, but as long as we didn't have that old blue eye.
Well, he sounds like my brother Philip. He was the intellect of the family.
Okay.
He was always breaking down radios and
Okay.
fixing things like
Same
that.
thing, then.
Yeah, same thing. Got similar dynamics.
Mom was raised here. Her parents were Ruby Barnhill. Well, Ruby McGee Barnhill. She was a McGee from Lynn and Hetty Colbert. And Lynn and Hetty would have been the parents for Uncle Lindsay. Came out of that family.
Well, the Barnhills, we connect on the Barnhills again there. Luther Barnhill.
That's right.
He was married to my Aunt Yvonne.
And so that's Mom's roots, and all of her siblings were here. Dad, on the other hand, came from Pennsylvania, and his parents had died. I never did have the privilege to meet Dad's parents. I hope to one day in heaven. And his siblings. So we would go to Pennsylvania to be part of family reunion, and we got to meet all of his siblings, which now there's only 3 of them left. That's kind of the history of our family.
Where'd you live growing up?
We grew up right across the street here from the church, where Dad has the store built around. There used to be a house there, and then the store just kind of grew out of his garage and shop, and he started building things on.
Okay.
And of course, we moved out to the airport back in the. I'm going to say somewhere around 74 in that neighborhood. And that kind of charted my path into aviation at that point.
Okay. Your connection with Porch Creek Indians now, your mother grew up out in Porch. She was a McGee.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, she was a Barnhill.
She was a Barnhill,
Right.
and she married a McGee. Okay.
Yeah, grandmother was a McGee, and she
Okay.
married Petro Rosasco Barnhill.
Okay.
So mother was a Barnhill, but they were all. Grandmother was a full-blood Creek Indian, 100% full-blood.
Okay.
As Uncle Lindsay was a full-blood. So then Granddaddy wasn't. So half of a full is a half. So Mama was a half. Well, Daddy wasn't.
Okay.
So half of a half is a quarter. I'm a quarter. That is the minimum criteria, minimum blood quota that you can have to be a member of the tribe is 1 quarter.
Okay. Now, you guys were all of you, you and Jerry anyway. I assume Dale, I don't remember Dale, but you were all light-skinned. Now, growing up, did you identify with the Indians in Porch, or
I did.
did that come
in
later?
school, they would do a census, and they would ask us. I remember I went to school at the old Rachel Patterson, the original Rachel Patterson School, which was on
Okay.
South Main Street.
Yeah.
And I remember them coming in and asking each of us, "Are you white? Are you
Right. There-
Indian? Native American?" And I would identify with that, and my classmates would sticker, "You're no Indian." Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I am. It's there.
Well, my
I
wife.
may be blonde-headed and blue-eyed, but I've got the blood. That's what matters.
Well, I've heard all of the stories about the discrimination against Atmore Indians earlier on, pre-World War II. When I came up, and I was born in 1947, my wife was 1 year behind me in school. But we talk about this all the time. We had some McGee's and Gibsons and Indians that we went to school with. I never even thought of them being Indian.
Right.
We didn't really separate
Didn't.
in our minds back in those days.
It was, I think, back in those days, the identity of, we knew that we were Creek Indian, and I think if you go even before when I was born, times were tough. Education was hard to come by. A lot of our people would go into the military, the guys. A lot of the women worked at places like Vanity Fair Mills. But you go back to grandmother's generation, Uncle Lindsay and Uncle Narvely and Uncle Britt and Cobe and that generation, they worked hard common labor, picking cotton.
Yeah.
Doing those type of things. I remember growing up and
Dipping turpentine, a lot of people did.
Turpentine.
Back then. That was hard work.
There was a group from the Porch community that Grandma and Granddaddy was a part of. I could start calling out names, but they would go work with some of the farmers, especially at planting time, when it was getting time to plant potatoes. And for the day, we would go out to a barn, and Grandma would make a brown bag lunch, and it was usually a biscuit with a piece of sausage, maybe it was just jelly in it. It was about all we could have. And they would sit there all day and take a bucket and turn it upside down. They would sit on that bucket on a board, and at the end of the board, they'd stick a knife up facing them. It was sticking up facing them, and they'd sit there and have a bucket at the end of that and take potatoes, seed potatoes, and I could see it to this day. They'd take it and slice it one way, turn it 90 degrees, slice it that way, turn it 90 degrees horizontally, and slice it 3 times, and drop it down in the bucket. And the guys would take those buckets then and these old burlap canvas sacks, and they would put those seed, those cut up potatoes into those bags, and they would just be stacks of bags. And the kids, those of us, some of my cousins and other children from the tribe at that time would be out playing. We would play all day in the dirt right there. Granddaddy would take an old syrup can and fill it with sand, and take a wire and put the lid on it and stick that wire through it and kind of make a handle out of it, and we'd pull that thing around, and just, that was what we did back then.
What was your granddaddy's name?
Everybody knew him as Rosaster.
Rosaster.
PR, Petro Rosasco was his name. Petro Rosasco. He grew up over in North Florida, over in Santa Rosa County, over kind of between Berrydale and Baker. You get right there to the Munson Crossroads, and just to the west of Munson, there's a little roadside store there. And just down the road from there, 3 Notch Road, you go back to the north, and out in there close to a creek is where they grew up out there. A lot of history in that area from the Barn Hills.
Yeah. Okay. And so you grew up here during your teen years. You and your brothers rode the trains and all that.
We did, right over here. Robert Martin used to pick us up, and we'd ride the trains around produce sheds, cucumber shed. Grandma and Granddaddy worked at the cucumber shed. They had the potato sheds there. They had, Mac Murphy's had corn, sweet corn, and People's Ice Company was right down the road here. And Lloyd, they'd make those 300-pound blocks of ice. Did you ever move those around?
I never moved them around, but I've seen them. I remember people had those. They still, when I was a kid, people still had those old ice boxes.
Those boxes.
Yeah, and they would deliver a block of ice,
yeah,
and you'd have to.
Every day they would unload those, put them on a truck, and bring them over here, here, the railroad track.
Yeah, I have.
By those sheds and the rail cars. That's how they refrigerated them, and they had a truck with an elevator, and they'd slide those blocks on the elevator, take it up top of the box car, and there'd be a guy up there with some he had a hook that he would put into that ice and pull it over there, and you'd hear it fall down in there, and just boom, boom, boom. And they did that almost around the clock when when the potatoes were in, and the cucumbers and the sweet corn. This was a busy area, and so we grew up in that area, and a lot of good memories.
This would be a good time for me to ask you about this. We're seeing today so many kids without nuclear family. They say 70-80% of the kids growing up today are without fathers in the home. Would you? Your upbringing sounds similar to mine. I always had a mama and a daddy. My daddy always went to work. He always come home in the evening, and he was usually mad about something. And I grew up thinking that's what fathers did. They went to work every day, and they wore overalls or something.
That's it.
But the kids today don't get that.
Right.
Now, how did that influence you? Having I assume your mother. I knew her a little bit. She was a very nurturing, sweet.
She was.
She was that way as a mother. And
Dad,
then that family dynamic, mother and a father, did that influence who you are?
And see,
having that
Dad
dynamic?
worked at home then. He had Marty's Furniture cabinet shop. And so for us, largely growing up, at our early years, after I was born, he was working at Standard Furniture for a while. But then even when I was very young, he began his own business here. So we had the luxury of having, I say a luxury, overall it was a luxury to have both mom and dad at home. Dad would keep us busy. We learned to sand. He'd build cabinets. We learned to sand. We learned to work with wood tools. I mean, there were shop tools there. Table saw, radial arm saw, the sander, the grinders, the shapers, all of those things, and the air tools. And then we also refinished furniture. And that was honestly, that was some hard work. I think, say to the parents of young children today, work is not bad.
Give them more work.
Work is good.
While you're saying that, I'm thinking there were 5 boys in my family, and my daddy worked off from home. We grew up in a farm community, but we didn't farm.
That's right.
Now, the farmers, they had stuff for their kids to do. When you have 10, 11, 12 kids, which a lot of people did, they worked that farm. They worked hard. But I'm amazed at how my father kept 5 boys busy enough to keep us out of jail.
But he did.
But having the furniture store, I never thought about that. But your dad had some stuff for you to do.
We always,
that family business.
Not only did we have work to do there, but he'd always have a garden. Today is Dad's birthday, by the way. He's 86.
How about
and
that? Well,
yesterday I had the blessing to be able to help him cultivate some garden. He's at his new home out near us now.
Great. Okay.
And planted some plants for him yesterday, and that made, of course, and I grilled last night and had him over for supper, so we have him a lot for supper now. And it just is it's that full circle life. Dad and Mom, they brought us into the world, and they raised us, and they taught us to work. And we didn't have TV growing up, but we had radio, and we had family times, and Dad, being a minister, he would read the Bible to us every day, and we would pray. I mean, that's a way of life.
Was the TV a religious tenant thing, or was it just?
Yeah, it was. The church took a dim view of the programming that was on the TV.
Okay.
I cringe when I see my own grandchildren just spending hours and hours with a cell phone or a iPad glued to their face or watching TV. It's like, get out of the house. Go out and dig in the ground. Learn to use tools. Learn to build something. Learn a skill with your hands that will help you survive. Yeah. And that's what Mom and Dad did to us. They gave us opportunities. And I'd say one key thing that I will say about my parents is they allowed us to learn. Did we get hurt in the process? Yeah. There were times when we made mistakes and got cut fingers and stubbed toes and had problems. But they didn't put a noose around us and constrain us. They allowed us to learn, and they allowed us to develop our own skills and ability, and they encouraged us, and they were there to support us. So I think that's important.
That makes all the difference in the world. And I could see from your lives that influenced who you are. You're one of the good guys, David. You probably got a few flaws, but I'd say your balance goes to the good guys, good guys team. Okay, so we don't want to run out of time. That's going to be easy. That's going to be hard to do for David and I. So let's move up. You met your wife.
Yeah,
and you got married and you had some I've seen your
did.
daughters. You got a great family.
Thank you.
Going the same direction your dad, I assume.
Thank you.
Because those girls are smart and pretty and,
Came out of
accomplished.
school. I graduated Escambia County High School. I was one of the fortunate ones that went to school at the old Rachel Patterson, the original one.
Okay.
Some great teachers there. My first grade teacher, Mary Brantley, Claire Wise was second grade, and then her sister, Imogene Brantley, was third grade. Those two sisters were amazing. And then Miss Davis, Miss Bobby Davis, his wife, she was my fourth grade teacher.
How about that? Okay.
And then Miss Harris and Miss Pritchett and Miss Van Pelt, Doris Van Pelt.
I know Doris.
I
knew her. She's passed now, is she?
No,
she's not.
No, she hasn't.
Oh, God, I'm sorry, Miss Van Pelt.
Not Miss. What a wonderful! She was my science teacher, and she would bring movies back in the day, the old 16 millimeter movies. We'd watch movies. Great memories from Rachel Patterson. Went to the old middle school, and then 9th and 10th grade over at the old junior high school. Up and down those stairs there, and great memories. Our class, I graduated in '79. We hold the record for the largest class to graduate from Escambia County High School. Class of '79. Then after high school, I eventually
That school was, when did they build that school? 60s, was it?
Boy, the old junior high school.
No.
I'm gonna
The
say it goes
current
back into the '40s.
That one, yeah. That's over
But-
where they had the chamber and so
Yeah,
in there.
That's correct. The old
Okay.
YMCA.
You went to school there in junior high?
I went there in 9th and 10th grade, and
9th
then
and 10th, okay.
later on in business years, I was in the Lions Club, and we took on that project because the school had moved out, and they were
Okay.
going to just let it go away. And we,
Well,
as
that's
the
a
Lions
beautiful
Club,
building.
restored that project, and it became the YMCA. But out of high school, I went to, fasten your seatbelts on this one. I went to Bible college down in Hobe Sound, Florida, at Hobe Sound Bible College. Some great memories there. That, as a preacher's kid, we lived at church and at camp meeting. When camp meeting time came, we were at camp meeting. And I've been in the old sawdust floor camp meetings, outdoor under an arbor, and the old wooden benches that would pinch you, and you had the old hand fans. You'd sit there and fan and fan and fan. And we'd go to camp meeting down at Hope Sound.
Sometimes those meetings ran a little overtime, didn't they?
We spent hours and hours there. And look, if you didn't go to the altar and pray, somebody was going to come tap you on the shoulder and say, look, we need to go take business. Let's go do this. So some great memories of camp meetings, and Hope Sound has a special part in my heart. It always will. I went to school there. They had a college choir. I was a part of the choir, and we would travel around and sing. And the director was Archie Coons, who's passed now.
Okay.
A dear friend. I really appreciate Brother Archie. Lloyd, it does something to you when at Hope Sound, it's a very large congregation, a lot of people, thousands of people there usually, especially at camp time. In the choir, we'd be up front and singing and just observing the audience, when you're participating. And at some of the camp meetings, when the Spirit of God
What's
comes.
it? Where is that close to?
Just north of West Palm Beach, between Stewart and Jupiter. After Hope Sound, I actually got busy with WASG. Jerry, Dale, and I, and of course Mom and Dad, partnered up, and we constructed and operated originally AM 1140, then it went to AM 550, and we added the FM, and that's 105.9. We operated those stations for about 12 years. We're heavily involved here.
Did you really? Okay.
Did a lot of things that cost us. It was not a very profitable, as far as business goes, it was not very profitable. Great memories of our time working in Atmore, being a part of the Lions Club and the Merchants Association, the Chamber of Commerce. A lot of good things happened during that time period. Amtrak started service. Jerry was heavily involved in that. He still is, hoping to get that service back up.
Okay.
Got a business degree from Jeff Davis, associate. But then I had good grades there, surprisingly. Some good people there. Kathleen Hall from Atmore, she was involved.
Yeah, I know Kathleen.
She made recommendations, and other faculty did, and I ended up with a grant from the Neal Foundation, and Pete Davis. I got to tag Pete. Pete was outstanding. At the time, they would pay for 2 more years of school, and it had to be at AUM, which is at Auburn. Well, I'm an Alabama fan, okay, through and through. But this was a freebie, so I went to AUM, drove up there 2 or 3 times a week at Montgomery, and got a bachelor's degree in management from AUM. Well, right then, AT&T, I had done some flying. I was a flight instructor. I got my instrument, and again, I'm going to tag Eddie Tullis, because back in the day, back in the early 80s, I had my private pilot license, but you need to have a commercial license, which you have to have an instrument rating then. Was expensive, and I didn't have the funds, and Eddie hooked me up with the Florida Governor's Council on Indian Affairs, and they covered the expenses of my commercial pilot training at Ferguson Flying Service in Pensacola. So I got my commercial and instrument certificates, and then I got my instructor certificate. B.C. Ferguson down there at Ferguson, he helped me with that, and I had some great experiences there. Come out of there, and I got hooked up. Mom saw an article about an AT&T airplane flying over Bruton area, and she said, you ought to look into that. And so I did, and I got a job flying air patrol for AT&T, which the fiber cable is buried underground, and there's a right-of-way over that cable. And for the most part, those cables are located along major interstates. They go into the cities and they break down at that point. But back in the 80s and the early 90s, AT&T was very interested in protecting the integrity, the security of that cable, because if it got cut, then service was out.
Right.
A cow could die and a farmer would go out and dig a hole. Well, if he didn't pay attention, he'd dig through and cut that cable. A contractor would go out and be clearing land. Erosion could occur, and the cable could be exposed and cause problems. So AT&T had a squadron of pilots, and they subbed this out, that were in the air every day, 5 days a week. I would be flying from daylight to dark. Little Cessna airplanes, 152, 172.
Just looking for problems on the line.
And my territory was all over the southeast. I covered the north half of Florida, all of Alabama, most of Mississippi, a little part of Louisiana, the western half of Tennessee, most of Kentucky. I had routes, and every day I'd take off and I would be low level. We had a waiver with the FAA, and we were down low. I was treetop height, and I was flying slow, and I was just simply looking. And we had radios in the airplane to talk to the AT&T technicians. Everywhere there was a technician assigned for that route to preserve it and protect it and respond. But we also had a link that would send us straight to the Network Control Center in Atlanta. And anytime, I'd always check in with them. We would always, if we saw something, I would turn it in. And there's these bird houses that if you're driving down the interstate, you might see these white poles with orange tops. Well, every once in a while, you'll see one that has a birdhouse on it, and there's numbers on that. Well, those numbers were for us, because we could be flying, and I'd say, well, I'm at number 861.
Okay.
Well, the technician would know exactly where to go. So I would call Atlanta.
Kind of like mile markers on the highway.
Like a mile marker. Yeah. It's a marker post, we call it.
Right.
And so I built thousands of hours. Air Patrol pilots fly more hours than any pilots in the world. Every year I was flying about 1,500 hours.
You were what, mid-20s, in your 20s then?
Yeah.
It must have been a lot of fun.
Kind of late 20s. I can say 28, 29, 30, 31. Some great people that I worked with there, Mike and Lynn Duff from Midwest Corporate Air up in Ohio. I love them people like family. And I kept an airplane here. When I wasn't working, I could use the airplane, and that was fabulous. I had my own airplane.
Wow. They pay for the gas too?
Yeah, of course I'd have to pay for that, but I could use it. So great experiences. I had a close call. I was over near Jackson, Mississippi one summer day, and there was a chicken processing plant. These chicken hawks would catch the thermals and they would just fly around that area. And I was down below them. Well, he folded his wings up and dropped right into the prop.
Oh, boy.
Hit the dash of the cowling over the engine. It hit the windscreen and it shattered it. But that threw him up into the wing. He dented, the bones in that bird dented the leading edge of the wing. And it hit the tail of the airplane, and there was parts and pieces of the bird all over inside the airplane. I got cut. Some of the glass from the windscreen hit me.
Did you have to make a crash landing or anything?
So we had an emergency then.
Yeah.
And there was another pilot with me, and we landed at Jackson. Of course, the fire trucks and everybody came out, and all this stuff.
Back then, you were probably fearless.
It got my attention. An open cockpit all of a sudden, you know.
Okay.
Everything was fine. You see a lot. Some people get mad at you because you come over. I mean, that cable goes all over the place, and so you go behind people's homes and things, and you see things that they don't want nobody else to see.
Yeah.
You catch people doing things that they don't want nobody else to see. And
now, that little airplane you recently acquired, did you not say that was the one you learned to fly in?
That's the same airplane.
The same one you're talking about? Okay.
When we moved to the airport, I became the airport bum. I was a young teenager then. And I don't know if it was out of desperation or sheer aggravation that Robert Earl finally said, all right, if you're going to hang out over here, then you're going to work. And I said, okay, that's good with me. So I started cutting grass. I started washing airplanes, cleaning airplanes, and fueling airplanes. And then he had 3 spray planes. And in the summertime, we were from daylight to dark 6 days a week. I was getting $130 a week then. And I would spend my entire summer out on that ramp at that airport. And if I wasn't fueling, loading up a crop duster, and I would do all the loading. I mean, we had these 5-gallon buckets that were heavy, and buddy, you had to split the tops and dump them over in there, and doing that and around the chemicals. And we didn't have gloves, and we didn't have masks, and 2,4-D and parathion and all this stuff.
Were you? Robert Earl was doing the crop dusting. He was doing.
Yeah, he was spraying. Matt McCutcheon was spraying, and Mickey Parker. So there was 3 spray planes,
okay.
And I think they loved to work me hard because they'd go, and by the time they'd all be launched, the first one would be back, and then I'd be loading him. Another one would come back. And
you didn't have time to get up and go for a flight with them.
No, you were just a constant burst. So as long as they were spraying, you were very busy.
Yeah.
And then we'd slack off about 11 o'clock maybe, and take a break for lunch, and then come back after lunch. And it was every day we'd wash those airplanes down. Every time they'd come in, you'd have to take the windshield cleaner and clean all the spray off. Good experience. Hard work. Mm-hmm. And when we weren't doing that, I was pushing the lawnmower. I'd go up and down the runway, cutting grass around the runway lights. Good memories, good experience, but I got to fly. I almost took off in an airplane one evening. Everybody left, and I was closing up, and I got in it and cranked it up. I was 15 years old, 14, 15, I don't know. And a neighborhood friend, Robbie Brantley, was there with me, and he hopped in. If Robbie hadn't been with me, Lloyd, I'd have taken off. But my better judgment was, if I'm going to do this, and I hadn't had the first instruction, I better not do it with somebody else on board. And so I backed out and I didn't do it. I later found out that Robert Earl did the same thing.
Really?
Except he took off by himself, and he didn't have a lick of instruction when he did.
But he must have had confidence that he could fly that airplane.
He
just watch
did.
it.
Robert Earl he could fly an airplane.
Really? Yeah, I remember going out to some little shows out there where Robert Earl did some trick flying.
He did. He did awesome. And
yeah, I went to school with Robert Earl. He was.
Did you really?
I think he was a '62 model. I was '65. He was either 2 or 3 years ahead of me. I think 3 years. He was 3 years ahead of me in school.
He taught me how to work, but he also taught me how to love aviation, and he gave me that opportunity. And for him, the airplane that I started taking flying lessons in, Robert Earl got it 2 years before, November 5203 Romeo, Cessna 172. And later years, Robert Earl lost his medical, and so his flying business went away. This airplane sat by the highway down at Mike Godwin's field for many years. And in time, Robert Earl passed a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with his wife, Elaine, and his daughter, Cindy, and I acquired this airplane. And it's a project my son, and I didn't even tell you about my family. Real quick, I married Cheryl Burkett. She and I met working at the hospital. I was an EMT with the fire department.
Okay.
Charlie Rutherford spent a lot of years with him running to fires and accidents. And that led to me working the emergency room at the hospital. And I was doing both med-surg. I wasn't a nurse, but I was an EMT.
Okay.
And so I could do some things, legally, and under the direction of the nurses and the doctor.
Your wife was a Burkett. Okay.
She was a Burkett from Burnville.
From Burnville.
From Burnville. Her parents were O.C. and Mildred Burkett.
Okay.
They lived over there on the little cutoff between Highway 4 and 168.
Okay. I know exactly
Arnold Burkett's her brother, Terrell Burkett, Daniel Burkett. Her sister was Frances Burkett, who married Webb Knoll, who's on the city council here. He was a Pepsi Webb.
Okay.
Pepsi Webb.
Small world, isn't it?
And we had 4 children. We had 3 girls. Stephanie was our oldest, and she married Daniel. They got married and have 2 children, and Addison and Colton. Daniel Alaniz. His brother has a little construction company over here, Cornerstone. Okay. Daniel and he work together. Stephanie is the head of the medical services for Escambia County School System. She has an office with the county office over at the old junior high building, the administrative building.
Okay.
She's a registered nurse. She worked the emergency room for a good period of time, following in her mother's.
Now, Stephanie's the oldest.
Stephanie. And then okay. Emily married Zach Smith. They live down in Bratt, right along the highway there.
Okay.
She is a CPA. She's the controller for United Bank here in town. They have 2 children now, Sawyer, and then they just recently added.
Did your kids, did they not go to Auburn?
Ansley. I'm sorry?
Did your kids go to Auburn?
No, they did not.
They went to Alabama?
No, they did. Yes, they did.
I was just thinking what you said.
Yes,
I was thinking they had gone to Auburn.
Well, Stephanie and Emily and Kristen, my youngest daughter, Kristen, she married David Vaughn.
Okay.
They all went to Alabama. Kristen and David met. Kristen was in the band at Alabama, and David was in the band, and so they got married. And in fact, they're in Jamaica right now with Kristen does marketing. She was marketing at Wind Creek for a number of years, and then she took a position with a defense contractor up in Huntsville, which is where David's from. David's a software engineer with a defense contractor. And she just got recognized for some outstanding work over the past 3 years with this company, and they sent them down to Jamaica. And she got an award on behalf of the company for the work that she's doing. And then my son, my only son, is Stephen. And he's kind of following in my footsteps. He started flying, he soloed, but he got his A&P mechanic license, and he works for the Continental Motor Company down in Fairhope. And so he splits engines. And so that's kind of, my wife worked as an RN with the Porch Creek Indians. She was the first RN the tribe had and worked there for years and retired and has been home. We acquired the airplane, and it's a father-son, it's a family project, but it's really a father-son project. I'm doing the grunt work.
Oh, you're doing the grunt work. Okay.
Stephen we've split the engine, got it down to the crankshaft, and he's working the cylinders and getting the cam and the crank taken care of. So yeah, we will rebuild this airplane together, and he's fully licensed to do that. So, and really, that's probably the only way that airplane would have been resurrected, because the cost to do it, if you had to pay to do it, it's not worth it. It's just simply too far gone. None of the instruments worked in the airplane at all. The engine was totally shot. So basically, all you have is the structure, and that's really just aluminum, and it's not really worth that much.
How long is that going to take you?
I would like to think by the end of the summer, but that all depends on how quickly we get the parts back. If we had the engine done, we could finish this airplane and have it going probably in a month or two's time. See what happens.
Well, that's quite a project. Yeah, keep posting those pictures, because I follow it. I follow you.
Just a couple of things that happened in my lifetime. Yeah. I had a detached retina in my right eye back when I was 14 years old.
14?
Yeah. The risk of going blind. And amazing, back in that time, they actually did laser surgery. I was in the hospital for 3 days. It was very basic laser surgery, but they reattached my retina. My vision went crazy. I was going to go in the military and be I wanted to be either an Air Force pilot or a Navy pilot.
Naturally, yeah.
God saw differently, and that detached retina changed that. And then I had something that happened that really was significant. Was I started having nosebleed. Actually, I was 16, 11th grade in high school, and after a period of probably 4 or 5 months, my nose would just start bleeding, and you'd pinch your nose off, and the blood would go down my throat. You couldn't stop it. I would wake up at nighttime, and I'd be bleeding, and clots I was swallowing, and it just started making me sick. Went to Dr. Ben Maxwell, who was here at that time. He said, "Well, you just got you're a free bleeder. You got a vessel that's bleeding." He said, "Here, I'm gonna give you some spray. Use that and see what happens." Well, over the next 2-week period, it got worse, and I was becoming anemic because I was bleeding so much.
Right.
I remember we had homecoming here one Sunday. We had a guest speaker in, and my granddaddy usually was not in church, but that Sunday he was. And I played trumpet. I played trumpet in church, and there's a very small mouthpiece and a lot of pressure. And I had got up and I played, and that night before I had woke up and blood clots and this, that, and the other, and came and I played trumpet. When I sat down, the preacher finished his sermon and said, "Everybody stand." And when I stood, it started bleeding. Went downstairs, and they were having lunch here that day, and had a little old mason jar. I filled that jar up with blood, and my granddaddy was walking by. Mom and Dad were busy with people. They grabbed a bowl and brought it in, and I was bleeding out. I was bleeding to death right here. Granddaddy and the evangelist grabbed Mom and Dad, said, "Take him to the emergency room now." And Dr. Johnny Stevens was here at that time. He came in, and I was pinching my nose, and blood was coming out of my mouth. I mean, that's where I was at. Dottie Paget, who's a tribal member, she was a nurse, and she came in, and they got with specialists, and they took a urinal catheter and stuck it up my nose and inflated it. And that saved my life right there. It put enough pressure. There was a tumor in my sinus cavity that was bleeding. That catheter inflated, put the pressure where it needed to be. Went to Mobile, to Providence, and the specialist 2 days later said he was going to go up in there and cauterize this vessel that was bleeding. Well, when I came out from that procedure, my nose was about as wide as my face. They had packing all up in there, and they had to give me blood that day. I was bleeding out.
That sounds painful.
So I was in the hospital for a month. Missed a month of school in the 11th grade. And after many tests, they didn't have MRIs back then. They did have X-ray, and they did a basic CAT scan. But they did the arteriogram, where they put the huge horse needle in your femur artery down in your leg there. And they shot a dye up, and they mapped it out with that. And 3 surgeons, 9.5-hour surgery. They had me upside down on the table. And they went in, took the roof of my mouth out, and they were able to get this tumor out that had an artery coming straight off the carotid. So it was very risky because they had to clamp that, and they were scared because of the proximity to the carotid artery. They gave me almost 10 units of blood, so I almost had all my blood replaced. And the recovery was lengthy. I lost a lot of weight then.
Probably a hard time eating, huh?
They had my mouth so
Usual liquid diet, yeah.
I had my mouth full of pack. Most recently, I started having heartburn back in 2019 and 2020, and I thought it was acid reflux. Went to Dr. Gehman, and he checked it out and said, "No, it's not reflux. You're going to have a heart cath." They stented me. I lost my medical at that point, so I couldn't fly. And after a 2-year period, I ended up having a double bypass. And, amazingly, after, 6, 7, 8 months after that, the FAA, the head doctor of the FAA, gave me my flight medical back. And I thank God for that, because I thought that it was going to be gone and I'd never get to do it again. I do fly now. My heart's better. And I fly a Learjet for a company, Crown Management. We're based in Monroeville, and I love doing that. That Learjet is extremely fast. It's a very busy airplane, especially when you take it off and landing. Typically, we'll climb up and fly in the 40, 41, 40.
Now, are they the ones who do there's some kind of flights that they do?
No, that's Pilots for Christ. And
Pilots for Christ, okay.
I did volunteer as a volunteer. Nobody gets paid there.
Yeah.
And I've flown some compassion missions with Pilots for Christ. And
Okay.
I'm of the belief in being raised in the church here. I do believe that, God gives us a period of time. It's our lifespan. And, from the moment we're born, we begin to die. When our day of departure comes, none of us know. For some, it's early, and you go to a cemetery, and there's some lifespans are very short. There's other lifespans that are very long. And God gives us the opportunity in that time to use the talents that He gives us in a positive way, to have a positive influence. I served on the tribal council for over right at 16 years. And through some of the tough times of the tribe growing, and then in latter years as the revenues from the gaming was really kicking in, when we developed Wind Creek property here in Atmore, and then up in Wetumpka and in Tallapoosa, and so many of the other projects that the tribe's been involved in, but the development of the tribal administrative complex, services, the housing, and the health care. There's so many positives, and the tribe not only is a positive for tribal members, but there's way more people employed with the tribe that are not tribal members than are tribal members. So the payroll impact on the quality of life of people at large is significant, and of the businesses and the taxes that the tribe pays. Because
they're only tax-free on tribal property, property.
On trust land. It has to be land that's held in trust with the federal government.
Okay.
And that's a very, very, very small percentage. That trust land is titled it's held by the U.S. government. So the deed says United States of America is the owner, but right under it says held in trust for, on behalf of the Porch Bandit Creek
Okay,
Indians.
that's what you call trust
and
property.
so that status then makes it federal, and the state doesn't have jurisdiction on that land. And so because of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which came into effect, and even you can go back to the Indian Reorganization Act, which empowered the Secretary of Interior to manage those lands. The Indian Gaming Act, which was brought into law under the Reagan administration in 87 and 88, enabled the tribes to do the gaming that we do, that you see at Wind Creek. There's two ways: administratively through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or by an act of Congress. We were fortunate, the Porch Creek Indians, Eddie Tullis and Buford Rowland, and I could go down the list. My brother Dale was on the council. I start calling out names, I'm going to get in trouble. You can go back to Chief Calvin McGee. There were those, my grandmother, and so many of the elders in that generation saw that down the road there was a future for the tribe, but they never realized it. Their time here was done. Now, my grandmother did get to see the first housing project that came. We became formally federally recognized in 1984. And shortly after that, the first HUD housing project, federal government project, came in, and my grandma did get to see that. And her sister Dorothy, the youngest in that family, Uncle Lindsay's sister, actually was able to live in one of those houses. Now, my grandmother had some work done in her house because of the housing services of the tribe. So that generation began to see the impact of the change that was coming to this tribe. The sad story about the Porch Creek Indians is after the federal removal, if you go back into the 1800s and you had the Removal Act came in, and you go back to Red Eagle, William Rutherford, and Sam Manak, and you go back to that generation, and they forged an alliance with then General Jackson, who became President Jackson. And there was the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which granted 640 acres of land to the Creek Indians in Alabama. The problem is that you go back to the history records, and when the removal took place, there was a gap there because the history records in the archivists did not catch the fact that while the Trail of Tears came and the 5 civilized tribes were removed to reservations west of the Mississippi in Oklahoma, and that's where the larger part of the Muskogee Nation is at. there was a remnant of the Creek Nation that was allowed to remain, and it goes back to the ties that William Weatherford, who was a mixed breed Creek, he was not a full breed. He established a relationship with General Jackson, and it got to the point after he fled from up near Auburn on the Tuscumbia, where the Horseshoe Bend there. On his horse, he fled because he was being surrounded. He came back to where his home was down here outside of Stockton, and he went to the camp there, and he found General Jackson, who didn't know who he was, and he formed that, and he said, look, I won't fight you no more if you will send some garrison with me to get the women and children who were scared and in the swamps hiding and bring them into the fort for protection. Of course, then you had the war broke out between the Red Sticks and the battle that occurred there. There's some interesting history that occurred in that alliance, because they then went back to President Jackson and got that 640 acres, which was given to the Creeks. At that time, there was no Creek Nation east of the Mississippi. There was no Porch Banded Creek Indians. And so the records did not reflect any Creek Indians left in Alabama. They thought they had all been taken out. They did not reflect what today is the Porch Banded Creek Indians, that remnant of the Creek Indian Muskogee Nation that was allowed to remain here. Well, our process for recognition took an awful lot of archiving, and Dr. Anthony Paredes with Florida State was heavily involved. Thousands of pages. That document is huge, that went through the administrative review of the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And we were granted that status, which was huge. That's made all the difference in the world here for the port. And it's made the difference not only for the tribe, but for this community, for this state. Look at what the tribe's impact has been. Incredible. And so we have a debt of gratitude to pay to those that came before us, that saw but didn't get to experience exactly what we experience today. But there are still those that are living today. Buford Rowland, Eddie Tullis. You know, there are many of those people that worked hard for nothing under difficult circumstances and paved the way for what we have now today. It's incredible.
Well, you know, anybody who can see the influence of Porch Creek Indian, what it does for the community. Just a real quick question, though, and I'm wondering about it, so I'm going to try to slide this in. Most of the Porch Creek Indian people, like you, are devout Christian. And the gambling issue, what is the rationale from your perspective for all of these Porch Creek Indian Christians having so much from the gambling?
Yeah, you're right.
How would you express
you're exactly right. You know, there were those that were opposed to it. I was one of the ones that was opposed to it back in the early days. And it was for those reasons. And so our opposition was simply based on our Christian roots and our Christian heritage. Right. Since that time, you know, I don't gamble. I have never once gone in and put money into one of these slot machines. I hadn't done that. I also realize that while we would love to paint the world the way we want to see it, that's not the way life is. And people do have a choice. And so the laws were created. And as a Christian, we are here and we occupy, but in accordance with the laws. And so there is provisions, I do believe, in the Christian faith that while I don't participate in it, I also respect the fact that, number one, it is legal. Okay. Number two, anybody that goes there has the choice to go there. It is their choice to do that. But people have a choice. There is the bad side of that, the idea that people would spend money gambling that should be used to pay bills and put food on the table and take care of their family. And if a person's doing that, I'm going to speak out against it, and I'm going to say you're wrong. You have a fiduciary and a God-given responsibility to take care of your family. You better not be gambling that money away, whether it's at a casino or any other way. You're a man of free choice. You get to choose your life, how you choose to live, and I respect that totally. Well,
you know, I think most Christians are in this area. I know I am. Free agency is a God-given right.
Yes, sir.
And he wants us to be free. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden. Now, God could have come in and made things the way he wanted them.
That's right.
But the whole story had to unfold through free choice.
That's right.
So he gave Adam the choice. And it all began that way, and everything is that way. You have a choice to do what you want to do. So I'm not arguing against you. I wanted to bring the question up because I thought it would probably.
Look at what has happened in this community. I remember before we built Wind Creek, we had the bingo palace.
Right.
I remember when that started, and people were like, oh, there's going to be crime, and there's going to be this and that. It's just people going to be living in poverty. Didn't really happen. Then when we moved into the electronic gaming, which is what we do now, and we built Wind Creek. Let me tell you, sitting at the meeting, at the tables, on the council in the development of Wind Creek, when we went to the market, the financial market was very difficult. And we ended up going to New York. And in the financial district, we had a gentleman, he went with us. And we got, 10, 11 banks to join together with us to build this casino in Atmore, Alabama. People were saying, y'all are stupid crazy. We borrowed, I think, it was right at $180 million, and we put $60 million into it right off the bat. So it was a $250 million project to start out.
That's big.
In Atmore, Alabama. People are like, y'all are stupid. What do they think now? We retired the debt on that property in less than 2 years. Look at the jobs. Look at the impact to this community. Hey, if you took the presence of Wind Creek and the Porch Bandit Creek Indians away from Atmore, Alabama, what do you have?
A big difference. David, thank you. We'll probably run a little bit over time. We'll have to squeeze the editing there a little bit. But this David Gehman. He's always happy. He's always smiling. And I have to attribute it to your these things we've talked about, the way you grew up, your mother and your father, your Christian. You never have fell away, have you? You've been pretty straight line all the way through your life.
Just hang on to that.
We'll take that up in another. But your faith is great, and I do believe that God blesses us for our faith.
There's a lot of great people that have been involved. My grandmother, without question, but certainly my parents, but other people in the church, and then in school and in life, teachers here in this community, absolutely. People like Robert Earl, absolutely. There's other people right now today that have absolutely just helped me in ways that God sent.
God does send them.
He does.
So somebody just said to me the other day, I don't like to use the word lucky. I like to use the word blessed, because that's what it is. God is aware. It doesn't happen by happenstance. Somebody said, well, much of life is being in the right place at the right time. I said, well, that probably is true. But if you've ever played tennis, which I'm not a great tennis player, but I have played, it's a matter, you always hit the ball from a stationary position. You got to run to get there, but if you're out of position, you're going to mess the ball up.
That's right.
So you're always where the ball is. You see a good tennis player, and you say, well, every time I hit the ball to him, he's standing right there, and he swats it right back to me easily. That's because he's in position. And we have to live our lives to be in position. Those opportunities happen. Sometimes we don't recognize them. We don't see them, and we don't take advantage of them. But if we keep our eyes open, and we stay on the move, keep in position. That's life. Is much of it is positioning. Position yourself for that opportunity, and God will send it to you. Just hand it to you. And this is why somebody said, "Well, you sure are lucky." All my life, God just keeps handing me stuff. Well, that's kind of true, but you had to be in position for it.
All through my life, and to have one of the greatest blessings that any man or woman could have is to have true love. Is to have somebody that beyond a shadow of a doubt. There's no doubt this person loves me and I love this person. That's the most beautiful thing in the world. I have experienced that, and I'm going to tell you what, I feel sorry for people that live life and they struggle. That's tough because it shows. But when you have that, that's beautiful. God's good.
You're right. David Gehman, he's the real deal. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Lloyd. Appreciate you. Lloyd and friends, awesome.
Well, thanks for giving us opportunity.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Lloyd and Friends Show with Lloyd Overton.